Hello mates and welcome to Masudio's video tutorial on cross-functional work. So we're going to talk today about software development in terms of XFN and what that means exactly. So you'll see this term a lot thrown around in certain organizations. Usually it's some of the big tech companies, Facebook, Google, Amazon, and Oracle, whoever else you want to talk about. XFN essentially stands for cross-functional. And what that means is any interaction where you on your team are interacting with another team member on a separate team and you're trying to get some sort of goal, some sort of work done. You might have an API that they are consuming and that API needs to be changed or updated to fit their needs for some reason. That kind of work is cross-functional work. Now, cross-functional work is very different from what you learn in school, which is software development. In school, you learn system design, you learn architecture, you learn how to code things up, you learn how to technically get something to work. In cross-functional work, the real challenge is personal interactions. When you step into a room and you're meeting with someone who's on a cross-functional team, you really want to start with making sure that they want to work with you and making sure that you understand how to work with them. Your challenge is to make sure that they trust you as a subject matter expert for your team's software, and to find out how they like to work as well, so that you can work with that person together. An important aspect of cross-functional work is aligning timelines. So when you're working on a project with another team, each one of those teams has separate goals and separate things that they want to get done, or potentially just different priorities for the same goals. What's important is to make sure that your timelines are made clear in those meetings and that you also understand your cross-functional partners' work and their timelines. And the reason that's important is because if you agree to do some sort of work together, and if you've agreed who's going to do it, you haven't necessarily finished the work because you got to come up with a timeline. When is it going to get done? When is each piece going to be ready so that the other team can depend on that being ready and move forward? A lot of times what will happen is a cross-functional team member will say, hey, we're going to get this work done, and they'll have some timeline in their head and say, okay, I probably have a few months to get this done. But in your head, you're expecting, hey, it must be pretty clear. We need it in a couple weeks. It's probably pretty clear in the meeting, right? But in actuality, if you haven't made that clear and put it down on writing, you gotta have Murphy's Law. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. And that means that if you haven't set up a timeline with that person, they're going to adhere to a timeline that is absolutely opposed to the one that you require. So make sure to set those timelines, make it clear in those meetings. Another aspect of cross-functional work is just getting those agreements down on paper. A lot of times as software engineers, we'll go into a room, we'll start working on a problem, get excited about it, and solve it. And after we've done that, hey, the difficult stuff is over, the technical stuff is finished. Nothing else to talk about now. Don't do that. Although a lot of aspects of cross-functional work can sometimes, to the conventional software engineers, seem boring because you've solved the tough problem. They're extremely important. You got to think of cross-functional work a little bit opposed to software development. Whereas in software development, you want to focus on the hardest problems to make sure that you solve those first so that they don't block you down the road. In cross-functional work, what you really want to do is focus on those problems that are a little bit easier, but just make absolutely sure that they're going to get done. So if you've already solved those problems and you know how they can get implemented, what you really need to focus on now is when are they going to get implemented, and to just make sure at each step, each party who is part of that project is making sure that that work is done. So think of that as high impact, maybe less technically challenging, but still extremely important. When you go into these cross-functional meetings, a lot of times what you'll do is, especially if it's your first one or first few ones, is you'll talk to this cross-functional member and you'll agree on some work that needs to be done, and your cross-functional team member will say, okay, great, so when will you guys be able to get it done? A lot of times what other team members on cross-functional teams want to do is they want that work to be assigned to your team because that means that their team is going to have more bandwidth. They don't want to take on that work. They want it to be done and have it finished so that they can say to their managers, yep, the work that you wanted to get done is done. But they don't necessarily want to do it themselves. Even if it's a challenging problem, if they can save bandwidth for themselves, they're going to want to do it. And in some sense, you probably want to think of things the same way. It might come to the point where you feel like, okay, we're butting heads, and you don't want that to happen because after all, you're probably working for the same company or at least working towards the same goal. But you do want to represent your team's priorities and your team's goals correctly, and you want to think about who has the best expertise in order to get this particular work done and who has bandwidth to get it done. So don't just say yes to all the work that your cross-functional team member wants to push onto you. Instead, just focus on your own goals and make sure that you're representing those well in those meetings. Now, so you've finished solving the problem with your cross-functional partner. You've come up with a timeline. You've agreed on who's going to do what work and when it's going to get done. And everything is all ready. And you've also got it in writing, which is important. Great. That might seem like you can walk out of that meeting, or you can put that meeting behind you and say, well, I'm done. They're going to get their work done. Nothing else I have to do. But that's not correct. In reality, what happens is those cross-functional team members, if they have priorities, if that project or the work that is assigned to them is a lower priority than it is for you, they might not actually focus on it. They might not write it down or remember it or actually prioritize it in their Scrum sessions. And if they don't do that, then they might look bad in the end, but it's also possible that they have a different management chain and their management might not even care that much. And if that's the case, then it's only you that's really going to feel the pain. So that leverage is still on their side. And that's why it's important to have follow-ups with your cross-functional team members. Once you have those things in writing, your job is still not done. And unfortunately, it's still not those tough problems, those tough technical challenges that software engineers love to solve. It's just following up with them. These kinds of projects have a tendency to change in scope. They have a tendency to fall off the wagon for some teams. Potentially they have an operational issue and all of a sudden their priorities change. The project work that they were assigned might fall off the wagon for them, and they might have forgotten to tell you. So it's important to follow up with cross-functional folks. How often, that depends on the project, and it's really up to your discretion, but make sure that you at least set up a reminder in your calendar to just check in with that cross-functional partner a week or maybe a month after that meeting. And the last thing you want to do is plan for when that cross-functional partner still fails to deliver. It's possible that you've done all the right things and you followed up with them regularly, and it's becoming clear in those follow-up sessions that they're not getting the work done fast enough, or they're not staying on schedule. What are you going to do if that happens? In most cases, what you want to do is just communicate that to your manager. Make sure in those cross-functional sessions you figure out, okay, well, what is the priority of these things and how do these things have to change? Maybe you have to take on the work. Maybe they have to add resources on their side. But whatever it is, the main thing to do is have a plan and know what you're going to do if that cross-functional member fails to deliver on time. And get in front of these things. If your project starts to go from green status, which means like you're on track, to yellow, make sure to communicate that. And if you're not sure what to do, get help from team members, from your manager, from maybe the more senior engineer on your team. So that concludes all the things I wanted to say about cross-functional work. I hope that's helpful to you guys who are soon to be senior engineers trying to move up the stack, trying to move up to become tech leads. And I'd love to hear your feedback in the comments. Thanks a lot.